Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-Commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the E-Commerce Edge podcast. It's amazing to have you along for the ride with us today. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome our latest amazing guest, Mr. Graham O'Rourke from Experlogix. Welcome, Graham.
Thanks, Jason. Big fan of the podcast.
Thank you so much. Look, we were talking about the fact that Dean McElwee, you said you've been friends on LinkedIn for a long time, but you only recently met in person. I only just realized you live just down the street from each other. And I've been connected with Dean on LinkedIn for a long time.
Yeah. Dean's a great guy. Yeah. So originally from South Africa, but lives down the road from me in Ireland. So it's a small world.
It is a small world. And I tell you, I realized just how small of a world it is when I was at Shop Talk last week, and about 40 Kiwis and Aussies came across for Shop Talk. And I tell you, wow, would you catch up with a bunch of Kiwis and Aussies? That was man, I had a sore head after that very first night when we all got together and had a few drinks and had a few laughs. And I hadn't seen most of my friends from the ANZ region for over 3 years because I've been living up here in Mexico. Man, it was good to catch up. I built almost my entire career down in the ANZ region in e-commerce, so lots of friends. It was great to catch up with everybody. You obviously didn't come across for Shop Talk.
No, we had been, we're quite global now. The history of digital commerce and Experlogix might be interesting if I
Please kick off.
Cool. Experlogix is a company that has three product lines. One is CPQ, configure, price, quote. So digital pricing, quoting, really complex quoting. And that product's been around for 25 years and is a world leader particularly in Dynamics and Salesforce. And then they have a document automation product, which again is mid-market and enterprise workflow document automation. And then 2 years ago, almost today, Digital Commerce, my company formerly, joined Experlogix, and that took us from being a leader in small parts of the world in terms of UK, Ireland, Western Europe, and Australia, New Zealand, where we operated for a number of years, to really having a global presence with Experlogix. So now the US is a big market for us, Canada. Obviously, we can reach further into Europe and as well as into Asia and Australia, New Zealand. Excited to be part of Experlogix. Excited now to be part of the Dynamics ecosystem because before we operated mainly with SAP, and that opens up lots of new opportunities for us.
And so your company was Afix, right?
That's correct. You've done the research.
So you ran that for almost 9 years, built up the platform, really targeted fully at the wholesale distribution, manufacturing, B2B commerce, to put it broadly. Yeah. And then obviously Experlogix said, hey, it's great that we've got CPQ. It's great that we've got document automation, RPA, et cetera, but we actually need a commerce component to be able to add to the suite of products that we offer to our clients. Let's acquire that. Instead of building from scratch, it's the classic case of build or buy, and they decided, why don't we just buy something, slot it in neatly underneath our umbrella of Experlogix, and let's go to market as a integrated suite of tools.
Yeah, exactly. And these things normally happen, I believe. You don't sell your company, You're bought. So it was a case of one day we were looking for further funding to grow and move into the US. And actually we had an offer to expand the company. And the same week, Bill Fox, CEO of Experlogix, rings me up and he says, hey, we've been watching you. We've been looking for a digital commerce solution. And really, it was a cultural fit. It really was. I got on really well with Bill and Marion, who's one of the other co-founders. Went to the Netherlands to meet Marion. And we just thought this makes so much sense. Starting in a new market, especially North America, is tough. If you've got a parent who's headquartered there, it makes things so much easier.
Oh, no doubt. And when you first started up Afix, when you looked out at the market, because even 8, 9, 10 years ago, there were already a number of mid-market / going upwards into the enterprise, the wholesale, manufacturer, distributor, e-commerce platforms out there. When you looked out across the market, what made you go, actually, I don't like any of these solutions. I'm just going to go and build my own?
There weren't as many as you might think even 10 years ago. I don't know. So it's actually the last 5 or 6 years we've seen real growth in this. But I guess what we saw was we were born in cloud, first of all. So we're a multi-tenant cloud. So
native
very
SaaS.
Like Shopify in the retail world. Yeah, native SaaS. So from the very beginning. And we saw lots of like clunky solutions, like with files and data being transferred and no real-time element. And I think the other thing I saw was we grew up with ERP. So we did like native integration to ERP from day one. And in the beginning, we looked at many different ERPs, and now we kind of specialize a bit in 3 or 4 ecosystems. But I think that's the other thing that really attracted me to it. A lot of wholesale distribution are these amazing companies that fuel our economies. No one really knows their name, but they're so fundamental to the whole supply chain, and they depend on ERP. So we grew up B2B e-commerce because it was more complex, and we felt consumer was well served. We thought native cloud because still, if you remember at the time, Magento were actually struggling with that, and still are a little. So then we saw ERP because we thought if we combined not just the software, but the actual deep knowledge of ERP with software, that would help us be successful. And I think that's still true today.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, how would you, as like somebody like Asana Commerce, for example, which started back in 2008, they've been around for a very long time. They pitch themselves in a similar vein in that they say, look, why would you want to recreate all these data primitives in your commerce platform when you could just integrate with your ERP and pull all the data directly in real time from the ERP, and you've got all the core data primitives you need there. You got your price lists, you got your catalog, you got your customers, you got your hierarchies, you got all that stuff. Why do we need to reinvent the wheel and bring that into commerce when we integrate that natively out of the box with the beating heart of your B2B business, which is your ERP? How? And then there's a few others that have built themselves as the ERP first commerce platforms, right? It feels like maybe you all came to a similar place at a similar time.
Yeah, that could be true. I think one of the things that maybe sets us apart is the multiple aspects of digital commerce we bring. For example, we've got our not only customer portal, B2B e-commerce, multi-tier e-commerce, but Punchout by us, field sales by us, even pocket shops, so scan to order from us. So I think there's a lot more from one vendor, and particularly because our route to market tends to be via the ERP partner mostly. Yeah, they really love that. And one vendor, one relationship, one connection, and you get everything you need out of the box.
And it almost feels, I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong here, it almost feels like you've gone down the Corvist, or there's a number of ERP first or ERP specific commerce platforms out there where they go, look, if you want, it's all great. If you're running SAP, for example, you may not want SAP Commerce Cloud, for example, might be massive overkill for your business in terms of an e-com platform. If you don't want to go and spend $1 million implementing SAP Commerce Cloud and eHybris, then hey, cool, let's implement Corvist. It's going to cost you a fraction of that, but you're going to get 90% of the functionality of an SAP Commerce Cloud plus native integration with your commerce platform. And there's a few. Store Connect is famous for doing the exact same thing on Salesforce and being that commerce layer. Oh, look, if you don't want to go and spend $1 million on Salesforce Commerce Cloud or their B2B solution or their Lightning solutions, then hey, come and get Store Connect. And again, for a fraction of that investment, you can get kind of 70 to 90% of the functionality of the vendor's commerce platform. And is that kind of what you had in mind? It's, hey, cool, you could go and you could try to implement the native commerce functionality on some of these ERPs. They're very big. They're very complex. They're very unwieldy. They're extremely expensive. I'm generalizing here, but just in general, they tend to be extremely expensive, and they tend to create a level of lock-in that not all enterprises are happy with. And was that kind of some of the things that were rattling around in your mind when you thought of the solution that you ultimately built?
Yeah, I think if I'm very honest, we discovered that rather than set out to do it, if I'm very honest. So very quickly, we actually had prospects who were exactly in that boat. They were like, am I going to pay $1 million for X? Which is, don't get me wrong, it's a completely different solution. Like deep analytics, lots of other things that, you get for that money. But if that's not going to change the dial for your business, why would you spend that money? Yeah. So, and then the other thing, if you combine that with this kind of multi-channel, multi-app approach, where they're like, hey, we can grow with your platform because you've got all these other point solutions that actually share all the same data, share the same connection, allow me to grow much faster. And the ROI is instant in terms of deployment. You're not into a 6 to 18-month project. And also from the point of view of kind of relationship, we're small enough to be agile and responsive, but now big enough to be global.
I like to say small enough to give a shit.
Yeah, that's a nice way. But yeah, and we really do. A lot of people take that bit for granted. If you cut me through the middle, it says
Yeah.
B2B. If our people, like our almost all of them on our front line, are ex-ERP people. So there's a really deep knowledge of what the customer is dealing with and how their workflow works and how the warehouse works and how important this is.
And let's think a moment about what you inherited through the Experlogix acquisition. You inherited CPQ, you inherited document management. There's a tremendous amount of EDI that's often found in B2B scenarios. A lot of data exchanges, a lot of document exchanges happen via EDI to facilitate this process. It's a 50-plus-year-old protocol, but it seems to be everywhere in B2B still to this day, and I don't think it'll ever go away. As you said, Punchout, massive in the mid-market for sure. Your Coupas, your Arebas on the eProcurement side, really well understood, really broadly deployed, and bring extreme efficiency to the procurement process. But you got to have something on the other end to plug it into to send down that Punchout catalog so that people can e-procure in an efficient way through you. And what I'm finding more and more is that a lot of B2B suppliers, they can't get into certain channels or they can't get into certain opportunities unless they have the ability to integrate via EDI, Punchout, self-service e-commerce, etc. There's certain tenders for government contracts and large commercial contracts where they require you to put in a bid and they say, look, here's the criteria, the qualifying criteria. If you want to become one of our preferred suppliers, you have to be able to integrate with us one of three ways. And here's the three ways. And if you can't integrate with us one of those three ways, don't bother applying because we'll never accept you. So it feels like a lot of particularly mid-market B2B suppliers, they don't know what they don't know, meaning that they don't even necessarily appreciate how much opportunity they have out there to go after and pursue if they're technically enabled to do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the last thing you said is probably the most important for that mid-market segment, which is not that they necessarily don't have the technical skills, but really it's not their core business. And they're sales orientated. As you say, I have this opportunity, I have to tick the box on this tender. I need to have Punchout along with B2B, and maybe along with, for example, order approval systems, which we do, that kind of thing. That's what's really most important. So they can be really nimble and agile without taking a $500,000 $1 million bill. They can retain these customers. And then on top of that, I think a lot of them are in verticals where we've focused, and it's not just like general wholesale distribution. So, for example, in Australia, New Zealand, one of our biggest customers is in uniform workwear management. And so that was another tick the box on the tender where they needed the customer staff to order approval, budget management, save your size, save your kit, and combine that with individual orders on B2B e-commerce. So we have this like vertical expertise that ties into the ERP expertise, and you put the two together and you've got these magic solutions for someone who needs to get through that tender or take on a vertical or be a leader in a space.
It kind of gives your ERP commerce superpowers because some of these ERPs been in place for 10, 20, in some cases 30 years, and they weren't always as user-friendly as we'd like them to be, and they certainly didn't have the commerce technology that modern consumers of that technology expect to be able to have available to them. And when we look at Forrester's report from the end of 2024 showing that 71% of B2B buyers today in the United States are millennial and in Gen Z, that tells me we're dealing with a whole lot of digital natives out there now, whereas even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, in the B2B world, that was not the case. The buying demographic and the selling demographic were very similar 5, 10 years ago. Now there's this bifurcation happening. You've got these second, third, fourth generation wholesale distribution, family business, family-owned businesses, third, fourth generation manufacturing companies. And now the younger generation is starting to take over and they're realizing, geez, we still do things the same way we've done them for 3 generations, which is great. We have these long-standing multi-generational customer relationships, but our buyer expectations are changing. And if we can't keep up with that, we will potentially hemorrhage them and we'll potentially lose them to a supplier that can meet them where they are. Because especially from an e-procurement perspective, the argument I hear a lot is, hey, if it costs us 1, 2, 3% more to do business with you because you can't meet us technically where we are, then we'll either expect you to give us a discount to offset those additional costs, or we'll just simply find another supplier that can integrate with us and make it seamless and easy for us to buy off you.
Yeah, I would go with that. And a lot of these new generations in those businesses, they're driving that business forward that way. And they're, I think, breaking through, and obviously it's mainstream now. That's good and bad. The expectation goes up, the offering needs to be richer, but the good thing is that the market is really accelerating. And also I think they bring a really new perspective on customer service, because it's not just about then e-commerce and transactions. It's actually about how do we do more and more online, because our customers are also my generation, and now they want that kind of service. But I think the thing about having native ERP integration is there's still this mixed model at the moment, right? It's not 100% digital. And so being able to see all of your stuff, in fact, you may have more than one buyer in an organization. Someone loves online and digital channels. Someone's still picking up the phone or sending spreadsheets. And as a business, you got to deal with all that stuff. But having our solution in place, or others like us, just means that you get a complete view when you log in, and people in the customer organization can see all of that stuff.
I think you raise a very good point, and this is something that is such a massive differentiating factor between your traditional retail e-commerce and B2B, is the fact that in B2B, we're selling into an account. We're not selling to a single individual. We're selling, and we have to view the account as holistically as we can when we're servicing that account, or when we're doing marketing to that account, or when we're trying to land and expand and sell more categories into that account, or whatever. We have to look at this very holistically, and that's something that traditional retail e-com platforms just they're not designed to do. And that leads me into my next question, which is, so you inherited a CPQ platform that was native within the Experlogix platform. The problem that I've seen is that traditional CPQ platforms were almost always designed to be an internal tool for sales reps. So most often they were integrated with CRMs, which are internal tools, or they were integrated with ERP, or both as an internal tool that moved from basically quote to cash. And it all started with the CPQ platform to make sure that we were giving the customer the right quote for the right solution. But now the expectation is, can we surface that same functionality in a self-service way to the customer? And so was the Experlogix CPQ platform always designed to be customer facing, or did basically once they bought you and brought you on board, they went, oh, okay, we now need to integrate this into commerce so that it can become a self-service tool instead of an internal tool?
Yeah, great question. So I think the reason they bought us was partly because it was not 100%, but it was a lot of that internal to a specialist seller using CPQ, but with rules and workflow and things around that. The product's perfectly capable and was deployed customer facing as well, but through third parties. Right? So now with our digital commerce offering, for example, only about 6 months ago, we launched our CPQ portal, which opens up the whole reseller channel, for example, first to CPQ. So now if you're a dealer in the network, you don't have to be an internal sales user. You can be completely outside the enterprise and use CPQ. And obviously, roadmap is then to embed that in much more of a shopping cart journey and have a native offering on that side as well.
Right. So would you say, like in a dealer network type of a scenario, you're saying almost like a B2B2B scenario where I'm distribution, exactly. I'm maybe selling to a reseller who's then selling to a business consumer, or perhaps even a retail consumer on the other end of it, might be B2B2C or B2B2B or B2B2G government in some respects.
Any of those combinations, but I guess just to explain the simplest case, maybe it might be automotive dealer network. Okay, so the manufacturer is using CPQ, they're using Experlogix, and now they open up CPQ outside of the enterprise into their dealer network, which may, of course, not be staff. They may share a brand logo over the door, but they may not be staff. So now that dealer, through our CPQ portal, not only can they quote, they can manage their own users. There's some workflow element of getting approval on that. They trace that conversation with the buyer, be that buyer a business buying trucks, for example, or be that a consumer buying a car or whatever. So that's really exciting, and that kind of shows some of the power of the acquisition. And at the same time, we've got great cross-sell opportunity for a lot of these manufacturers that have spare parts businesses, which is a key vertical for us.
Makes sense. And when we think about the document automation piece, there's a lot of documents that flow between enterprises, non-disclosure, non-competes, there's contractual obligations for dealers with suppliers, distributors with manufacturers. There's so many different workflows that aren't necessarily directly commerce related, but they're tangential to the commerce process. But then there's, of course, the EDI component you brought to the table with your e-commerce platform, already connector for Punchout. But were they always doing EDI as part of their document management solution, or did they have they expanded that to be able to cover EDI as part of commerce?
No, it's much more on the kind of contracts and like mass document production type space. But what we've done interestingly in commerce, though, is use the same workflow engine, templating engine in document automation to do things like custom catalogs, which end up as PDFs, like in downloads and stuff. That's still part of that journey and very important for some sectors. But across CPQ and CPQ portal, it becomes much more about contractual documents, and then into insurance and finance, which doesn't really touch e-commerce, but like it's mass document generation, really smart form to document, replacement, translation, all of this at pretty high volume.
And so would that also facilitate a scenario where we can have now digital customer acquisition through the commerce platform? We can expose this. So for example, usually when a manufacturer takes on a new distributor, or a distributor takes on a new B2B customer, for example, there's a whole application process. They've got to get credit approval. They've got to be approved for certain products or categories of products. They've got to maybe sometimes have certifications. There's a lot of process that goes on onboarding a new customer, assigning a price list, all that sort of stuff, right from the point of I'm applying for a trade account all the way through, okay, you're now an official customer in our ERP and in our commerce system. Go for your life. You're going to be able to log in and see everything you need to see. There's a massive workflow that's usually associated with that. And so does that tooling assist with that process and automating that process?
It does, exactly. So particularly in the Microsoft ecosystem, where you've got the initial application, the generation of documents, the workflow, maybe connecting into Power Platform to make sure that workflow works within inside the organization. So that's exactly the flow that would happen on that side, yeah.
And how do you feel, or how do you approach, when we think of B2B, some of the biggest challenges come in the area of breadth and depth of catalog. So oftentimes these distributors, like in retail, if you've got a 5,000 or 10,000 SKU catalog, like that's a decent sized catalog. In wholesale distribution, a million SKU catalog is not abnormal. A 5 million SKU catalog is not abnormal. So we're dealing with very large databases of products. We're dealing oftentimes with ERPs that were never designed to be a PIM system. They were never designed really for complex order routing and orchestration. They were never really, especially legacy ERPs, were never designed for proper multi-location inventory, multi-domain, multi-storefront, multi-brand. They just were never, of course, most ERPs have the idea of a subsidiary, and that's how they handle that, but it starts to get real messy when you start trying to do a whole bunch of commerce-y stuff inside of ERP. It starts to get real messy real quick. So how do you guys think about PIM, order management, multi-location warehousing, back order management, that kind of stuff in the context of self-serve e-commerce? How do you think about that stuff?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things I think we do is we help particularly the partner channel by, I'd say, we make them look sexy. So part of the ERP story it's serious stuff. It's finance and stock and logistics and contracts and customers, and it's all very important. And pricing, that's pretty complex down to per customer, per account. So that's really a lot to handle when you think about that. And then you've got like multi-company and tax, and it goes on. No one tool can do it all. So from our point of view, we don't actually embed software inside the ERP, which is different to some of our competitors. You mentioned SANA and some others where they actually got add-ons inside the ERP to do that. So we try and stay integrated in terms of having real-time access to all the data, but not being embedded. So that gets rid of this problem on a wave or on an upgrade where you got some problem. Again, being a pure cloud application, pure SaaS, that keeps us light and nimble. So then we got the ability ourselves as a kind of mini PIM to distribute that additional product information to multiple sites. You can imagine us in terms of B2B e-commerce, even retail, because obviously 20% of maybe B2B also have some kind of retail business. But then obviously we've got these apps and we have to distribute really efficiently these large catalogs to these apps. So we've got this kind of, I would say, PIM-like functionality inside the product. And then we integrate with other, for example, Perfion is one that we have a partnership through Boyum at the moment, for example. But we've got a super, I won't give away the name, but a really large, heavy industrial manufacturer in Belgium. Again, 1 million parts, and not all of them in the ERP. So we can also handle this idea of they're in the PIM, but maybe it's not stocked, so therefore it's not in the ERP. And how do you handle that transition between the two, and how do you get that onto a sales order, make sure the sales order is still valid in the ERP. So we've got many mechanisms for handling that. Each tool needs to be specialist. So we don't see ourselves as a pure PIM, obviously, but we see ourselves as that really nice PIM-like functionality for that growing mid-tier company, a mid-market company. And then once they get to the upper end of mid-market or into the lower end of enterprise, they need a PIM, and then we play well with PIM.
Yeah, and then at that point, they'll go with a Syndigo or a Salsify or any number of dedicated PIM systems out there. So you kind of like, meet them where they are, which is, hey, we've got some light PIM functionality for you, so you don't, because we know ERPs make terrible PIMs. People oftentimes try to shoehorn them into being a PIM. Terrible idea. Just not designed for that. Not designed for enrichment workflows. Not designed for stage gating. Not designed for channel-specific distributed data. Just not designed for this at all. You can force them to do it with custom fields and the like, but it's ugly, right? And you bridge that gap between full-blown, dedicated, separate, but API-integrated PIM and needing to maybe enhance the data set, the core data set that comes out of something like their ERP.
Yeah, precisely. And along with PIM, obviously, is a big thing is workflow and version control and stuff of data. So once you're into that territory, you're not on our platform for PIM, you're somewhere else. So I think that's a good line where you got many people in your organization involved, and it's got like a really heavy workflow for a new product introduction into e-commerce. So that's a really key sign that you need PIM maybe. So there's volume, there's a couple of other things. But then it makes sense that we can play well with that. And obviously, in terms of then having the flexibility to map all those fields, in fact, by configuration rather than code, and then be able to make sure that the right information gets into ERP. That's critical, or else the whole
falls over.
Promise of, the whole thing falls over. There's no saving there if we can't do that job.
Right, and presumably you have the analog to multiple inventory locations in the ERP. You have that same analog in your platform, so to where there's a one-to-one mapping. Okay, in this location I got this number, in this location I got this number, and then being able to manage things like order splitting at checkout by location and choosing where we ship from and what the shipping rules are, depending on where the customer shipment address is, where the originating address of the inventory is. All that stuff has to play nice together with either a WMS and or an ERP where that data originates from, but it ultimately has to end up in the commerce platform so that some decisions can be made around business logic, workflows, back order management, order splitting, etc.
Yeah. So if you look at, that's exactly it. So obviously we're handling stock at multiple locations from that point of view, different warehouses or bins or however that's configured in your ERP. So that's pretty standard out of the box. And because we're working in these verticals, like there's a lot of stuff we do in the merchant sector. So obviously those merchants in multiple branches, the use case is, hey, I'm a builder. I need to pick up stuff tomorrow. So I can use the Experlogix app to fulfill that order, pick my branch. It's not my home branch, but it's where I'm working tomorrow. I need to pick it up from there and then split that order and say, look, I'll ship me this stuff to there tomorrow. I'll pick this up today. In fact, all in one shopping cart experience. You can split it up. You can send it through. We can hold that one sales order. We can submit it as two separate orders. All that really detailed stuff. When they say we're really into ERP, that's exactly what I mean.
Yeah, because a lot of that stuff has to be facilitated by ERP, and we have to have as near as possible or as near as we can to real-time inventory, especially if they want to fulfill from store or fulfill from branch. They want to facilitate, will call. They want to facilitate all these weird and wonderful fulfillment models. Maybe they even want to do drop ship for a certain set of SKUs. They want to, and then maybe eventually they want to set up their own marketplace for yet another set of SKUs that they don't even want to have in their ERP, right?
Exactly, yeah. And we've got that like down. Obviously, that can even be per account. Some accounts allowed certain brands. It's amazing to go back to the other one. The little things that really set us apart sometimes are like whether on those ERPs, you need to group those items on the sales order, like more or less indent them on a sales order to facilitate shipping, logistics, warehouse. Those little things that we can do by configuration sometimes where other people are into mass customization or run into problems it's a really tiny example of how if you're really deep in ERP, but you're B2B e-commerce, how you can make that work really quickly. So that's, I think, really part of the secret of having ERP people in company when we're delivering, designing, building these features.
Yeah, and the other thing I run into fairly frequently, it's not with every engagement, but it's certainly, I would say, greater than 50% of the time, a requirement that I see, especially in wholesale distribution, is that the customer will have their own unique part number that's equivalent to your part number. And when they search on the website and when they receive their invoice, they don't want to search by your part number. They want to search by their part number. And so oftentimes that one-to-one mapping will live in the ERP on their customer account, and they'll say, our part number is this, their part number is this, the buyer's part number is X, and our part number is Y. And oftentimes they want to be able to control that or manage that through the commerce front end. They want to be able to upload a CSV of those mappings. So that way, when the invoice comes down and they're trying to do their reconciliation, they go, okay, I know you sold me this part number, but this is my part number, and this is what it reconciles down in my ERP when I'm doing my accounts payable for all the stuff we need to pay for with you. So it's these, it sounds so easy and it sounds so subtle, but if you're working inside of a platform that was never ever designed, or B2B was never a consideration at the beginning, and we find this a lot with e-commerce platforms that originated as B2C and D2C platforms, and then they slowly over time had more and more B2B functionality bolted onto them. And this is even going to Adobe Commerce. Like I know, because I was originally working in the Magento ecosystem back in 2008. So I know what this looked like. And even Magento themselves, they try to pitch themselves as a fully fledged B2B platform now, but there's a lack of data primitives. Yes, you can customize the bejesus out of it to shoehorn it into doing B2B the way you want it to and that's their pitch, right? You can customize it to do whatever you want. But should I have to customize my e-com platform to do the most fundamental table stakes things that are expected just in almost all B2B businesses?
Yeah, and I think this is a function of these platforms come from B2C to B2B. It really is, because there are different complexities in a different world. You're fast-moving consumer goods. You don't want to buy a B2B platform, right? But if you're B2B, you don't want to buy really a retail platform. And I think what happens is, like, by the way, we're not against agency, but I always think back to that Salesforce campaign, which was no software, right? So we're no agency. We're not really no agency, but it's just to stress the point that we're not coding that stuff for you. This isn't the first time we've come across this. It's not a project. Okay. And for like hyper complex businesses that need tailored solutions, that's the right way to go. But for mid-market and lower end of enterprise, or where you need a point solution in a global brand, like in a brand within a global organization, I'm not sure if that's always the right way to go, because the customer ends up owning these customizations. They're developed on Magento or on whatever platform, and not having to go Magento either. The customer doesn't realize they're buying that extension. And now their upgrade path is through the agency, or they own it themselves. And if they upgrade their ERP, will it still work? So for those basic things, I 100% agree with you that it doesn't make sense to try and shoehorn a B2C platform in, because one, it won't be any cheaper, and two, it'll cause you a lot more pain in the long run.
Yeah, and then you launch with technical debt out of the gate, and nobody wants that, because as you say, you know, no distributor wants to be a software development house. That's not what their specialty is. They're not a subject matter expert on software development. Okay, you might argue that a McMaster-Carr or a Fastenal or a Grainger or whatever, they're software development houses now, but in the beginning, and that's fine. When you get over $1 billion or $5 billion in revenue, if you're a Grainger or whatever, then maybe you can justify having 50 developers in your development team and tailoring absolutely everything to exactly the kind of experience, and that becomes a competitive moat for you. Great, but if you're a $100 million distribution business, you probably don't want to go and develop a whole bunch of custom software and then have to maintain it after the fact.
Yeah. Or go back to your supplier and realize those people have moved on and no one knows how it works anymore.
Which is pretty scary. And where do you sit in how do you make your money? You're a SaaS platform, so you know I'm guessing it's some kind of a subscription model. And then how do you price it? Is it based on the modules that they take on? Is it based on the number of SKUs, the number of transactions? Like, how do you put together your pricing model for your customers?
Yeah, we like simple. So it's like simple tiers of transactions. And we got 5 tiers, not very complicated, from entry level up to lower enterprise. And then there's no penalty as well for breaching a tier. Like, that makes no sense to me whatsoever. Okay, next year you're super successful, you move up a tier, you pay a slightly higher bracket, but there's no retro pricing or penalty for that. So it's really simple, really transparent. Our onboarding is really low because for most customers, it's a standard out-of-the-box onboarding, and we've got a dedicated onboarding agent, and they simply help you configure, provide training, consultancy, make sure that you're going to be successful. But they're not coding, they're not designing, they're leading you, the customer, in your language through the integration. Maybe there are some custom fields, they need mapping, that kind of thing. And then, of course, we do have a dedicated customization team for people who want extension, but that tends to be 10% of our customer base, and it's really about retention and working with like our biggest customers. It's not really about margin or making money. We're like SaaS license revenue is how we make our money.
Yep, makes sense. Subscription model, like the shop, effectively, for lack of a better term. And like you said that you're not really a partner-led platform, meaning that you're not necessarily out there primarily provisioning through SIs, agencies, going through the scoping, the design phase, etc. So are you doing most of the implementations yourself in-house?
Yeah, we do have two models. We do have customers who can implement. And like, for example, our template language is very like Shopify's Liquid. So like partners can customize, they can put in logic, they can roll out and onboard customers, but we tend to send through ERP partners, so they don't tend to want to do that. So we do it basically for 90%. But we do have some partners who implement, some partners who extend. We have some consultants, obviously, who work with our customers where we've no tied affiliation with, but they help our customers be successful, all the post-launch marketing, all the data management, all of that kind of thing.
And then that, I'm guessing that means you've got an internal iPaaS platform built into the platform to facilitate those integrations and mappings into the ERPs and back out of the ERPs, that it's all an all-in-one packaged solution to facilitate that?
Absolutely. So like it's day one, we connect to ERP and you're up and running.
Right.
Yeah. So now a customer wouldn't launch day one. They have a lot of work to do themselves. But in terms of actually business in Australia, electrical wholesaler, just because we were mentioning Australia, New Zealand, so I'll stay on that track, but left in a corner, tried to bespoke a system. It failed, big contract deadline, 7 days up and running. Now, in that case, we help them import the data, connect to the ERP. But the connection to ERP, of course, is the simplest bit because it's native and it's us, and it's not a connector, it's not a third party, it's not a development. So that is possible. It's not typical. Obviously, you wouldn't necessarily launch anything in 7 days and have enough time to even check it, but business problem solved in that case. So it's not a technical challenge to launch quickly, but it is important that customers make good decisions for things like workflow, for their warehouse management system. And that's where our onboarding agents come in, and they just help those customers make good decisions.
But those are your internal employees. That's not like some third party that's doing that.
Yeah, so we do have, like in 10% of cases, a third party does it, but it's 90% us.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I find it so interesting when product vendors also try to do PS and managed services, because oftentimes it's really hard. It's really hard. Just in my experience, it's really hard to be an awesome professional and managed services business and an awesome product company. It's just hard. Now, sometimes what I'll see is that major platform vendors will seed the market in the beginning by saying, hey, look, we're going to do this, but our goal is to be a partner-led model. It's kind of like Shopify, right? You wouldn't go to Shopify to get them to implement your site. You wouldn't go to BigCommerce to get them to implement your site. You'd go to an SI, a proper partner that knows the platform. And in some respects, the partners know the holistic view of the platform better than the vendor does, because they've got like product teams within the business that are managing components of the product, and they don't necessarily have, apart from maybe the head of product or the chief product officer, who in theory should know everything about the product, those teams internally working on those individual pieces of functionality don't necessarily know how they can wangle it and make it do weird and wonderful things, but the SIs do, because they have to make it work for their customers.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say we don't manage all the services. So one of the things we've been very careful about doing is we will onboard people onto our platform, but we are not a full service digital agency. We don't pretend to be. We're very clear about that. You need a partner. Okay. We actually would prefer if that partner was on board, they were on board in the beginning, and we're walking alongside them, and then they continue, because there's a lot of work in these projects that's actually more to do with the business and decisions and even business models,
business logic, as well as all that stuff.
Yeah. So we don't pretend, or never will we venture into that space. We will work with partners there. But I guess from a platform point of view, and because historically ERP partner has been our most successful channel and route to market, again, they've great ERP skills. They don't have digital skills. They don't have teams that work in even the same technologies. So it makes sense for us to get the customer up and running. But again, we're hand in glove. Like, one of the things that we really do is work really well with those partners, because they may have been through an ERP implementation and they can be amazing and they can be hell. Okay, so it depends, but all of the scars are there at that point. Everybody knows now how it works finally. And that's not normally even the ERP partner's fault. Yeah. It's normally this unknown thing about how the business works. But if we stay tight as a kind of triangle, Experlogix as the platform provider, the ERP is in their area as understanding exactly how we've mapped the business model to the data, and then the customer obviously has all the product knowledge. So that's the kind of triangle we normally work in. And then more and more the customer is bringing in project management, independent agent, digital marketing of some type, growing an in-house digital team. That's what they're doing alongside us. And we're not there to do those things. Those specialists are there for that.
Makes sense. And who are you finding that your customers mostly are? And by that, I mean, inside these organizations, is it the head of business systems, head of IT, head of sales, head of ops? Like, generally speaking, who are the most common people you end up engaging with? Is it kind of head of sales or rev ops or something like that?
Yeah, there's a head of sales, head of finance sometimes, because ERP often is still owned by finance. Yeah. And then more and more in large organizations, IT as well. So you've got, but in mid-market, a lot of the time it's head of sales with support from IT, or head of finance with support from IT. And then in larger projects, in larger companies, international companies, you tend to get it driven by sales, but they're very much led by IT and ops. Yeah,
makes complete sense, because obviously for fulfillment workflows and everything else, man, you got to have ops and fulfillment in there. Otherwise, it's going to get messy real quick. So yeah, and then of course finance, they're paying the bill, so obviously they got to be on board. And they run the ERP 9 times out of 10. Occasionally HR, but oftentimes HR is sitting under finance anyway, so it all falls to HR and finance to manage ERP.
And they're driven by the efficiency. So it's the efficiency we bring that they really want. And obviously, if you're in finance, that's super important. Sales, you want growth and you want to expand your reach, or you want to service customers better, or
be more efficient
have your
in your
team
sales
focus
process.
more on account management. Yeah, exactly. All that.
Love it. And if you were to look out 6, 12, 18 months, is there anything your customers are asking you to do today that you don't yet do? Or is there any gaps in the market that you go, oh, we don't do that now, but we see this as an opportunity that we can exploit over the next 6, 12, 18 months? Like, kind of what are the biggest priorities on your roadmap? Of course, AI everything all the time. Basically, unless you got AI in your name, you're probably not going to get any external financing at the moment. So AI is everywhere. Specifically, what's on your radar that you say, this is some practical things that we can bring to our platform to make our clients' lives better?
Yeah, cool. Thankfully now we don't need external financing, so we can just row our own boat now, which is cool. But I think like efficiency is obviously a trend that's going to continue, right? We're facing into uncertain times, like globally, with like tariffs and more barriers and nationalist politics and whatever. So nationalist economics, for that matter. So like efficiency and making sure that, I wonder, will a lot of these big projects, like, they won't go away, but there may be a point where we have to consider what investment decision do we make this year, right? So being able to offer efficiency from the platform is really important. So we see that through obviously what we do today, plus being very integrated, for example, into the agentic AI world. We are not going to build tons and tons of native AI. A lot of our customers don't have enough data to really leverage that stuff very much, but we should be open and be part of that workflow that will be driven by agentic AI. So in the SAP world, we've already done some really nice partnerships with a company called MyWave. Actually, I think the CEO is from New Zealand, as it turns out, but big in the SAP world. And so they're basically an in-house agent for SAP, for ERP. And of course, we've done a project where they can talk to us so we can get a workflow going with a superseded product, change in ERP from agent through to ERP, through to B2B e-commerce, instantly, real time. Customer service is the other trend that we see. And I think that's going to be really hot as we go forward. So we've got a whole online service desk with transactions in our product now. You couple that together with agentic AI and the right records are updated in CRM and everybody knows what's going on. So I think there are 2 hot topics for the next 18 months that we're going to be focused on.
Love it. And how do you think about, because you just spurred something in my mind when you were talking about customer service, there is oftentimes an overlap between sales and customer service as it relates to CRM, the CRM data, updating opportunities, updating workflows, updating, oh, cool, they made these 3 contacts about this opportunity. Cool, it's now time to hand that off to their account manager or whatever it is and close the deal or whatever it is. Not all ERPs have a CRM module. And even if they do, not all the time do merchants leverage the native CRM module. And sometimes they might be running SAP, but then they might be running Salesforce CRM and then integrate those two together. It just seems to be the common thing, or they'll be using some other CRM to manage basically quote to cash, the quote to cash process, and even from application to approval process of an account, they might be managing that in a CRM. So are you finding that oftentimes you have to dual integrate with an ERP and a CRM as part of your projects? Is that a common design pattern?
It is when we've got like CPQ in the
Yes,
picture.
of course.
Because like you said, a lot of the time CPQ might be into CRM, but then converting that quote into an order might often be into ERP, for example. In B2B e-commerce, not so much. We don't yet see that. But I do see more and more that, like, we do see what you see out there in terms of customers having a mix. So what we're doing with Copilot on the Microsoft side at the moment is, again, just buying into the agentic AI model and looking at service agents there. And again, a bit like I spoke about earlier, saying, okay, it doesn't really matter to us what system you want the data in to some extent, because that's the job of the agent now. So the user then is automating their workflow. The agent is orchestrating what's going on, but also importantly, Copilot is saying, look, are you sure these are the changes I'm about to make? And then the agent says, or the person says in control, tells the agent, yes, that looks good. Let's do this. And all systems are updated. So I see that us having that complexity in our product perhaps isn't needed in that world.
Yeah, makes sense. The agentic side, it originates in the ERP oftentimes in many respects, or originates in the CRM. But the agentic side becomes more like an orchestration layer, almost like an iPaaS in a way, because it's ultimately, at the end of the day, it's APIs talking to APIs. That's what it is, right? So to me, it feels like the next evolution of API level integration, right? Where it's a little bit more flexible and a little bit more autonomous, but ultimately at the end of the day, we're still integrating with APIs. That's the end result at the end of the day.
Yeah. These are 2 cloud-based computer systems, so that's what they will do. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Love it. Listen, Graham, this has been a fantastic conversation. All transparency, I'd never worked with Experlogix before, or certainly don't have any experience with it or knowledge of it. So it was great to get the inside skinny on what you are, what you do, how you do it in the B2B world. Now, as we do come down to the end of our time together, I get to flip the script, hand the microphone over to you, let you ask me one question. Any question you can be personal or professional. Mr. Graham O'Rourke from Experlogix, what is your question for me today?
I would ask you, Jason, where is the fastest e-commerce market in the world for B2B?
Fastest. You mean in terms of growth?
In terms of growth, and in terms of adoption, let's say first, second generation adoption.
Yeah, look, I think UK and US are still way, way ahead of the curve. In certain verticals, UK still even ahead of the US. In certain verticals, US ahead of the UK. Look, for a lot of B2B businesses and verticals, they're still 5 to 10 years behind B2C, D2C. But I was really encouraged when I went to Shop Talk last week. I was really encouraged by the sheer volume of B2B conversations that businesses were wanting to have with me and other people because there's not that many of us that go to Shop Talk that are actually into the B2B space. And so when you're one of the few that are speaking the language of B2Bs, everybody wants to talk to you that's interested in B2B. And it was pretty impressive how many one-to-one meetings, because they have that sort of matchmaking service. Okay, what is a brand looking to do? What do you provide? Let's match them together and have some good conversations. There was some I had probably 10 really solid conversations that will probably either turn into business for me or some of the platforms that I work with as a client, that they're clients of mine. And so I think I was pleasantly surprised that was the case, because this is my first Shop Talk, and I was not expecting there to be any conversation really happening seriously about B2B, but especially large wholesalers in a specific area where they might be selling retail type products, but at wholesale volumes to large retailers, big box stores, food service, etc. Those kind of conversations starting to happen at scale, where they're going, we have a very large field sales team. but we need to bring some automation to this because we just can't scale realistically. We can't scale much more than where we're at right now with a 100% physical sales team. It's just not going to happen for us. And we've got new markets we want to go into. We've got new regions we want to go into. We've got new languages we want to support. We've got all these things that we want to do, but without automation, without some sort of commerce system in the business, we realize that we've got a massive handbrake on our growth, basically. We just can't get to everybody. And even Dean mentioned on when I had him on the podcast, he said, look, when Black & Decker goes into a brand new market, let's say it's India, for sake of argument. Now, they're in India now, but when they first were looking at going into India, they weren't thinking, oh, we need to put 10,000 sales reps on the ground to go and meet with all these stores that might want to carry our products. It's totally unreasonable. Like, even if you had 10,000 people, it's not going to help much in a country the size of India. And so they led with a digital commerce experience for wholesale in these new expansion markets, these new greenfield fields markets like India. They start with a digital first offering in those markets. And this is what a lot of brands are wanting to do now. They're saying, hey, look, in our home market, let's say our home market's the US, great, cool. We've got well-established field sales processes and reps and named accounts, and our top 50% of our accounts all are always going to have a named account manager, and we're going to treat them really well with kind of white glove service and everything else. But both for our smaller end of town clients and those that want automation on the procurement side, and for greenfield markets where we're expansion markets for us, we cannot afford to put salespeople on the ground. We can't do it. And so these are the kind of conversations I'm increasingly starting to have. And it's really encouraging that I started my consultancy. I've been doing this for 25 years, but I started my independent consultancy 4.5 years ago. First couple of years, little lean. I still did well, but certainly there was a little more convincing needed. There was a little more cajoling. There was a little more education. There was a little more generating demand as opposed to just capturing the demand that was out there in the market. There was me trying to make a lot of content out there and trying to produce as much education at scale as I could. Whereas now it feels like we're slowly starting to turn the corner, that most of these businesses, even if they're not ready to pull the trigger today on some form of digital commerce solution or automation or system integration or something like that, they're thinking about it. And it's almost a universal theme that they're all going, how can we make ourselves more efficient while creating a better customer experience at the same time? And that's a mindset shift that I've witnessed over the last 4.5 years that is really encouraging.
Future is bright.
It's very bright for all of us working in B2B.
Yeah,
it really is. I felt like I was a little early to the industry in some respects as a consultant, but man, I'm sitting pretty now, and it's great to be able to meet with my people like you that come from this B2B industry. It's so awesome, and it feels so encouraging. Listen, I really appreciate your time. I learned a ton. Can't wait to speak to you again soon. Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.